Organised crime and corruption in New Zealand is getting worse, and alarm bells are ringing.
Well, New Zealand is losing the fight against transnational serious organised crime. That's the finding from a Ministerial Advisory Report, which also shows methamphetamine consumption is skyrocketing.
Kia ora, I'm Lillian Hanly. Welcome to Focus on Politics. And this week, a focus on an explosion of meth use and the findings from the Ministerial Advisory Group on transnational serious and organised crime. Funded by the proceeds of Crime Fund, the group includes members with experience across government, law enforcement, regulation and the private sector. Set up in February by Associate Police Minister Costello, the group is tasked with providing monthly reports highlighting information and recommendations regarding New Zealand's response to organised crime. Here's Costello on the purpose of these reports.
Building an appreciation of the challenges that organised crime presents to us as a country collectively, rather than by individual agencies. And that's what we're trying to get, is build a public appreciation of the challenge that's ahead of us.
Just this week, in its third report so far, it told the government corruption in the country is getting worse.
Well, back here, a new report warns corruption in New Zealand and the Pacific is accelerating, driven by organised crime. A ministerial group looking at transnational crime has told the government we're the only Five Eyes country that doesn't have an anti-corruption strategy, and that needs to change.
In no uncertain terms, the report warns the government that corruption and insider threats are increasing in New Zealand, despite the country's long-standing reputation as a country largely free of it. The group was told by enforcement agencies about trusted insiders at ports and airports helping to retrieve concealed shipments of illicit drugs before customs inspections. It raises a specific concern in the Pacific, where exposure is increased due to expansive maritime borders, strategic trade corridors, and growing cross-border flows of goods and people. TVNZ Pacific correspondent Barbara Drever has done extensive reporting on the issue.
Last year, One News exposed the level of corruption amongst the meth epidemic there, a major drug dealer revealing many in the police were compromised. How corrupt are the police?
Very much.
The report points to the perception of New Zealand as being free of corruption, leading to a degree of inertia. Police Commissioner Richard Chambers is quoted in the report as saying New Zealand's not only been complacent when it comes to corruption, but also naive. It says the country is poorly prepared to tackle the increasing threat and recommends developing a national anti-corruption strategy and modernising the Crimes Act. The very first report released in March states the threat posed by organised crime in the country had increased substantially in the last 5 years and, quote, even with the best of will, New Zealand is losing the fight. A section in that report was titled Rearranging the Deck Chairs on the Titanic, which says current efforts to fight organised crime were not keeping pace with its accelerated growth. In fact, organised crime is worse than ever, it says, and New Zealand's response has not adapted to the sophistication of modern organised crime groups. One specific issue it focused on in the March report was the increasing availability of illicit drugs in the country.
Police believe business is booming for gangs in New Zealand and that they're now making twice as much money from dealing methamphetamine as they were a year ago.
Meth in the workplace is skyrocketing.
Turns out we love meth.
With wastewater testing showing Northland has the highest meth use per capita.
More and more meth is making its way to the streets of Waipukaro. Officials are alarmed at the surging meth trade here.
The gangs have significantly increased their control over the methamphetamine market.
Work underway by a Ministerial Advisory Group has highlighted the growing international links of gangs in this country. Its very first report talked about new organised crime groups becoming active here from China and throughout Southeast Asia, and the role of gangs such as the Comancheros and Mongols importing meth from South America through the Pacific.
There's been considerable coverage of the increase in meth use, and the report lays this out. It states that 10 years ago, Customs seized nearly 55 kg of methamphetamine over the entire year. Last year, Customs stopped more than 90 kg every week. Based on wastewater monitoring, the report outlines around 15 kg of methamphetamine was consumed every week in the March 2019 quarter. In the December 2024 quarter, around 36 kg was consumed on average each week. It references how in the past, major drug seizures would have a clear impact on consumption, but that's no longer the case. According to the National Drug Intelligence Bureau, there was a 96% increase in 2024 of the minimum annual consumption of methamphetamine compared to 2023. Around 72 million doses of meth were consumed in 2024, with a total social harm cost of $1.5 billion. And it points out locations with high methamphetamine use per capita were largely regional towns also experiencing high rates of socioeconomic deprivation. For those working with affected communities in the far north, it's not a new issue.
This is over a generation now that it's impacted here in the far north, and I just think it's deeper social issues, that are impacted through generations, but also what we're seeing here, with challenges in our community with a lack of income, poor housing, lack of access to employment, and those types of things.
That's Maria Baker, who is the CEO of Te Heku Hauora, a health organisation serving the far north. Echoing that sentiment is Vanessa Kite, the founder and director of Rākau Ora, a mental wellness service in Kaitaia.
More of the same as it was 20-odd years ago, to be honest. So I come from a lived experience background, and I've got about 30 years addiction under my sleeve as personal use, and so coming back around now as a clinician and starting my own service, I am seeing things that I saw way back then, unfortunately. So in the counselling, I'm seeing 90-odd% is addiction, but generational addictions these days. We've got fourth generation of meth users, which we weren't seeing in my time. It was like, I think we were the second generation, if that. We've got whānau, very young whānau, that are starting their drug journey, not with dope or anything like the old days. They're starting on meth. And it's horrendous, the immaturity in their growth, but their maturity and the dark side of things, is it's really quite horrific.
Wow. Could you just say, when you say young whānau, how old are we talking?
Oh, gosh, 15, 16 is not uncommon.
Teenagers using meth?
Teenagers, absolutely. By the time my clients that are probably in the early 20s have already tried at least once to give up drugs.
And Mike Corrigan from A&T Trust in Kaitaia, an NGO, says the increase in meth use is causing a ripple in the community.
You see it in justice, you see it at the food bank, you see it in education and disruption for kids in their schooling. You see it in the reported burglaries and crime. The level of violence is increasing. You talk to Whiria Tamuka, who's in a pilot with police around whānau harm, and they aren't seeing an increase in numbers, but they're seeing an increase in the brutality of those call-outs, lots more strangulation events and vicious violence.
Here's Maria Baker again.
Methamphetamine seems to be more of the drug of use. It seems to have replaced alcohol and cannabis more so. We see it. We see it in the street. We see it in our services. We see it in the communities that we visit. So it tends to be a lot more visible. What we're seeing is that there's a lot more people and a whole range of different people from all sorts of age groups that are accessing and using methamphetamine. So to me, it suggests it's cheap, it's accessible, and it's available here.
And it really is available. Here's Professor Chris Wilkins from the College of Health at Massey University talking about the wastewater testing, pointing to that doubling of consumption of meth between 2023 and 2024. An increase, he says, is almost unheard of.
New Zealand's had methamphetamine for over 2 decades, so you can characterise it as having a pretty mature demand profile. It's pretty baked in. People know about meth, so it wasn't the case that suddenly people woke up in that last quarter of 2024 and decided, well, we're going to double our meth use, or we're really interested in meth suddenly. So everyone knows about it. So that's why we're proposing that it was essentially just more meth turned up on the market and the price went down, and more people, of course, used it then.
There's been a decline of 36% in the price of a gram of meth over 6 years, and a decline of 23% in the point price of meth, which is its retail price. But while the price is coming down here, it remains high internationally, making New Zealand an attractive place to sell. Casey Costello says the country has a supply-driven market.
The traditional environment of gangs as we know it, the very the high profile that everyone's heard of, the mongrel mob and the black power, there's this business cartel over the top that's really forcing that supply into every market. So they've got a huge amount, and largely because it's a hugely lucrative market for them. The retail price in New Zealand is about $135,000 per kilogram. In the USA, it's $7,500. So you can see that to sell in New Zealand, it's worth the risk. So they're pushing it hugely.
The April Ministerial Advisory Group report describes the need to drive down the profitability and increase the level of risk for organised crime. It estimates the annual profits of crime in New Zealand are around $1.6 billion, whereas police restrain only $75 million each year. Current measures aren't effectively catching the money, and the group says the government needs to set a clear objective to do so. In this year's budget, Casey Costello, as Minister of Customs, allocated $35 million over 4 years to target drug smuggling at the border and beyond. That's great, says Vanessa Kite from up north, but it's getting made on the ground too.
In New Zealand, we have some of the best chefs of drugs sitting here, right here at home. So obviously, all these cartels or whatever they're called, they're bringing their shit in, but it's getting made just as good here, if not better. And there's a lot of chefs out there, and they're making some really shit gear, cheaper gear, as the government makes it harder. So, we can tell up here, I can tell in my room when there's been some bad gear, a bad cook, basically, because the come down of our people is really hectic. We can have about 2 weeks of just real violent behaviour out there, and straight away we're going, oh my God, who cooked this shit? So yeah, get it at customs, cool, but we got to fix here.
Sarah Helm from the New Zealand Drug Foundation also believes simply targeting supply is not going to work.
What we're concerned about is that if we don't address demand and reduction, those supply side measures are very short-lived, because as you grab one supply source, another one steps in to meet the demand. So we're really calling for some bold action around reducing harm and preventing harm. It's surprising how hard it is to get help for people. So we desperately need a rapid escalation of addiction treatment availability in the country.
Casey Costello says it's all linked.
We've got to recognise that it's a very different world, and we are being treated as any big business would treat us. They are infiltrating our borders. They're taking huge amounts of money out of our country, and that's where we've got to look at this differently. This isn't just about how we've always thought about the drug problem. This is about focusing on the international cartels that are driving at huge profit to themselves drugs into our communities. So I'm not saying this is about locking more people up in New Zealand that have addictions and problems. This is about the organised crime network, and that's what we're focusing on.
And targeting international crime is not all they're focusing on. It's one part of a multi-pronged attack against the issue that includes efforts from her colleagues as well. The Prime Minister has brought together what he calls the Meth Sprint Team. Casey Costello is part of it as Customs Minister, alongside Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith, Police Minister Mark Mitchell and Mental Health Minister Matt Ducey. Paul Goldsmith told RNZ the Sprint Team is in active conversations with officials around options, and they're looking at what can be done to disrupt both supply and demand. Safe to say we can expect announcements soon around a response to the issue. That could be within the next month or so. For Mike Corrigan and others in the far north, it can't come soon enough.
We're a long way away from resources and help. We're a long way away from Wellington. We don't have the resources, we don't have the programs, we don't have the groups, we don't have the infrastructure even to effectively cope with what was happening a year ago, let alone what's happening with that increase now.
And as for tackling organised crime, Chair of the Ministerial Advisory Group, Steve Simon, says to expect an omnibus report in September with recommendations. Is this also, in a way, trying to prepare New Zealanders for potential law changes?
Yes, the Minister said, look, I just want solutions. Now, if the solutions come from organisational change or cultural change or legal change, just don't be shy. Just be bold about what you recommend.
It feels as though New Zealand is unprepared and even unaware, like you say, as to how bad things are. This latest report this week around New Zealand's reputation as being free of corruption, right? But those ideas, some of the quotes around inertia and Richard Chambers pointing to complacency, things like that, it just kind of paints us as not being prepared. Would that be right?
We've relied on our good reputation. And we've also relied on our kind of she'll be right attitude of, we'll look after one another, we'll be okay. New Zealand is, an honest place. And that has traditionally been true, but we're in a new market now.
That was Focus on Politics. I'm Lillian Hanly. Thanks for joining me. Mā te wā.